Nen can transmute more than just what Wing describes, and the strongest transmuters all take advantage of the same principle for their Hatsu, because there's a difference between how transmutation is simply explained when characters are broadly learning about Nen, and the underlying idea they actually think of it through when they're developing their abilities in the series. So if we want to look into how to make the strongest transmutation ability, and what mechanisms transmutation actually works through to know which design choices will be the most effective to learn and apply and scale up as you grow stronger, let's go over what transmutation really affects, how the strongest transmuters use it, and what the most effective ways are to incorporate transmutation if you're in an adjacent category. Hatsu optimization is important because you're constantly in the process of improving and atrophying any skills you have. Every time you're inclined to use an ability, it will have a constantly shifting level of strength, and this would be an opportunity to improve it further. If an ability takes too long for you to learn, you lack the opportunities to use it when you need to, and you also prevent yourself from getting experience using it. It's important to structure an ability well, so that you can learn it quickly, use it where you need to, and improve with it further. So figuring out how a category effect functions is the difference between designing an ability that doesn't have the right posture at its core, that stagnates in development, or doesn't have many use cases in the real world, and designing an ability that's such a solid foundation, it could be applied to the world like a tug of war with zero resistance, it could grow in power as the user strengthens their other talents, and it could be used to branch out additional techniques. If you spread yourself thin trying to learn an ability that doesn't fit you, because even if the Nen category lines up, it relies on other talents or ways of thinking that you either don't have or can't control, then your personal mental process to learn that ability is what lacks a stable core. You need a Nen affinity and other talents you can't choose for yourself in order for certain abilities which draw from all these traits to be optimal for you. There are all sorts of goals you can achieve and ways you can develop, but your avenues are fixed. You need to approach challenges in the right sequence, which means you also need to be mentally in tune with what sequence is right for you. The characters who are given permission to learn Nen, and who become powerful throughout the series, all have the ability to meaningfully exercise and improve themselves on command. This is a rare trait in the real world. Most people, when hearing drawing tips, need to already intuitively understand most of how to draw in order to make use of that advice. Otherwise, the drawing won't come out that great. But there are more well-rounded skill sets, like physical mobility and situational awareness, that can be applied to anything else you do and become foundations for any other skills you learn. If you have the skill to learn, you can internalize abstract advice as long as you can interpret it, which means you can use it to then make yourself stronger. But locking in the ability to improve on command would require a sort of trade-off, because even though the broader a concept becomes, the more universal the way it manifests will be, people still internally work in very different ways from each other. So for someone to be able to know how to grow through deliberate training, they need to ingrain whatever specific method of internalizing it is stable and limitless for them. People whose behaviors are overridden by emotional responses need to learn how to use those emotional responses to move their practice along. And by ingraining that mindset, they're going to filter concepts and skills they learn through that idea. So they're going to be good at picking up skills that move and displace things. People who are driven at their cores to follow their impulses need to learn how to practice those skills through following their impulses and frame those skills as tools for those desires, so they have to stretch skills and theory they want to learn to fit in a Venn diagram of opening new doors, but also fitting whatever self-indulgent purpose they'd already have for it, which is why Transmuter Hatsu are conceptually about flexibility. When you want to learn transmutation, your mental exercise is to try to bend your aura into increasingly intricate shapes. And the strongest transmuters all have abilities that conceptually transform things, like by converting one type of energy into another. Phaeton turns his own pain into power. Bisky turns someone's fatigue into physical tension she can massage away. Killua converts life energy usable for combat into electricity, and vice versa to charge up his attack stamina from electrical cables. although that's partly from the fact that he also has a dual affinity for enhancement. So conceptually, his ability both conveniently transforms energy from one state to another, and amplifies what he can do by concentrating energy. He's altering his aura so it can hold a charge and absorb more energy than he naturally has. The specifics are still unclear, but Killua's ability is introduced in a way that already cleanly fits both transmutation and enhancement's applications. Our introductory transmuter also embraces this principle, because Hisoka changes the appearances of surfaces and flexibly uses the twists and turns of battle to satisfy his biggest desire and overwhelm any opponent as long as they don't rig the fight ahead of time. And even then, he could probably bounce back from that and gain an upper hand over them later. But flexibility for personal convenience is just the mental principle for transmutation Hatsu. There's also the physical one that the mental principle is meant to line up with. Transmutation's tangible effect is described as the ability to change the properties of the user's aura, although that description is partly combined with the mental application and partly simplified to be a basic lesson. I mean, emission is described as the ability to project the user's aura, but we see emission teleport things later in the series. But there's a clear difference between emission and transmutation, and when I was trying to uncover the underlying thought process behind Nen as a power system by cross-referencing its inspirations with how we see it work to try to reverse engineer it, one thing that stood out as a good measure of whether my current understanding made sense at all was how if the Nen categories were all symmetrical with each other and could affect both the user's aura directly and physical objects in the environment surrounding them, transmutation might seem to need to be able to apply changes to the properties of substances, which would seem to be too fantastical for a physically grounded world like Hunter x Hunter's. People in Hunter x Hunter's world, or in ours, can't know the nature of physical existence from our perspectives, whether reality is ultimately physical or conceptual. All we can do is see the stuff around us and guess through observation how it breaks down into building blocks. We can also observe that if we do some action, like clench our hands, anything in our hands, like paper, will be crumpled up, but consistently, based on the material and the amount of power we put into our hands. One cluster of building blocks pushes into another, and that transfers some kind of what we could almost consider fuel for change, which is both defined by the fact that a consistent amount of observable change to the physical building blocks of the stuff around us is happening, and helps define what those building blocks are by describing their consistent observable behaviors. You don't curl your hand a slight amount and find the paper violently compressing into itself on its own. There's a consistent measure of something, an amount that goes from the hand into the paper, and then from the paper into anything else, in a constant chain reaction where the overall state of the physical world is continuously changed by the rearrangement of the stuff within it. So energy, whether or not it exists or it's just a description of behavior, is what we call that observable amount of power or change that passes between directly observable things, even though we can't even say if those directly observable things, those physical things, are real themselves, or what they come from if they are, because we can't see what the nature of the world is at its core, since we can't read any information beyond what our senses can take in. As a form of analysis that's possible for people, energies and materials mutually define each other as overlapping models we process the world through the harmony of. Aura comes from chi, which is meant to be a form of life energy separate from the traditional types of energy in science. Those kinds of energy, kinetic, thermal, chemical, whatever, are all one self-contained system of pattern recognition. They describe physical materials and processes, so they're all one tight-knit model where they can't ignore each other because those energies are really just different readings of the same flow that all have to be able to turn into each other. But chi comes from a separate analysis, the overall recognition of the functioning of living beings taking in concentration of some vague conceptual potential from the environment around them and achieving that potential through their movements and continued survival, dispersing that potential back into the environment in diluted form, like a water cycle that inherently describes the stability of any distinct piece of an interconnected whole, whether or not the laws of physics we've studied turn out to be true. The concept of chi descends from an ancient care for optimization, and some systems have taken this to mean that if you try to raise the amount of chi you're concentrating in your body, you can improve your autonomy and lifespan. In Hunter x Hunter, the reason this life energy is wielded as aura is also optimization, because it's like insulating the source of the aura so it can concentrate more on radiating effects from its actions instead of having to endure the effects of outside sources. You can get more or less use out of your life energy depending on what shape you release it in, and it's so effective that if you shield yourself in life energy, you become immune to the environmental chain reactions blinding you to it, like in JJK. maybe check that video out. All the power systems I cover are connected to each other, both from what they're based on and deliberately by the authors. Anyway, what's important about JJK, at least from what I've been able to look into so far, is that the Nen principles of Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hatsu can also be explained through domino effects. Ten has you loosely create and shield yourself in a cluster of dominoes so you can tank outside forces and set off your own attacks with greater effectiveness. But this comes at the cost of colliding with more outside forces overall, which can sometimes be bad even if you can shield from them. Zetsu has you stop all the domino chains you can set off so you have less of a presence and can slip through the domino collisions other people are using like pings for detection. Ren has you freely build up a larger domino when you're already using Ten as a shield, and Hatsu lets you make that custom domino fall to achieve some customized effect on the world. A Hatsu is not a specific type of power. People can use aura principles like muscles that are just unrealistic to learn to control individually. The idea of Nen as a set of mental principles is that they're optimal ways for a person to be able to take advantage of the properties of aura. So the idea of Hatsu is that conceptually, they are ways people can compartmentalize achieving outcomes through their aura, so they can hook their aura up to some algorithm in their head, radiate their aura to give them enough freedom to meet these conditions, and then spend their aura through this algorithm in some way they prefer. To bring it all together, life energy has physical power in Hunter x Hunter, so Hatsu can trigger one of 6 fundamental processes in aura that gets it to genuinely impact the physical world, which would then convert it into various scientific forms of energy as it passes through and rearranges physical building blocks. But this is where the anomaly of transmutation ends up being explained, because the whole time, as an energy, aura would have been a complement to the physical world as a way to visualize a charge of how much somebody could rearrange the world through a handful of specific behaviors that they spend aura in order to cause, which would be the physical effects of the 6 Nen categories. So in total, the physical principles of Nen categories have 2 different types of effect, one on the aura itself and one on the behavior through which the aura can be spent to rearrange physical substances. So it's just that for most categories, both effects could intuitively be described the same way. For enhancement, you can spend aura to concentrate energy in the circulation for some function, and for manipulation, you can spend aura to box clusters of physical building blocks into some function. It's with emission and transmutation that you can more easily divide the effects on aura as a visualization from the behaviors it can be used to cause. For emission, you can spend aura to physically displace materials, but to do that, you can also just move the aura itself. And for transmutation, you can alter the conceptual properties of the aura because that flexibility makes it easier to perform a more tedious and intricate set of operations in the physical world. So Hisoka, as a pure transmuter, just transforms his own aura to make it stretchier so he can turn that stress into different movements. And Machi, with dual affinity for enhancement, changes her aura into strings in order to amplify her precision and speed. But you could theoretically transmute a physical object by giving yourself a Hatsu that changes the properties of your aura so it's tailored to easily perform an incredibly complex but proportionately specific series of physical operations on something to rearrange the structures of the materials it's made of, changing what they are. You could turn an apple into gold if you sacrificed all your potential to do it. Maybe you'd need some extra material so it could stay the same size, but then again that'd make it heavier. So if you wanted to have the same weight, you could just change the shape of it a bit. Bisky arguably uses transmutation in this way when she's using Cookie as a conduit to intricately apply aura to improve and override the various intricate functions of the pieces of the human body. As a Nen teacher, she's a good example of what you can do with transmutation if you have the formal knowledge that most capable transmuters would have a hard time getting themselves to learn.